位兄弟姐妹，大家好。我是福建人，但是我福建话你能听无啦？听有啊？听有啊？永春福建人，永春福建人。I was very pleased to accept the invitation of Dr. Pai for two reasons. Firstly, because I was excited to hear that there was a group of Christian Chinese business people with a burden for spreading the gospel. So I wanted to say yes. But the other reason was because I was so impressed by the graciousness and humility of this brother. We all vessels for the Spirit of God. And we carry in our lives a fragrance. Paul talks about this fragrance. And we can always smell the true fragrance in those who carry in them, in our lives, the Spirit of Jesus. And this dear brother, when he came to see me, I smelt in him the sweet fragrance of Jesus. And I said, yes. So thank you for this honor to come and share with you something of the work that we are doing, not just in Africa now, but also in Asia, and how we are seeking as business people to work out our faith, to use the talents and the gifts and the time that God has given us to impact the communities that we are seeking to serve, primarily amongst the poor. You see, the Christian faith started out amongst the poor. In the first 100 years, 90%, maybe more, of the early church was slaves. They didn't have money. They didn't have influence. They didn't have property. And yet that was the most aggressive phase of the church's growth. And there are things that we need to go back and relearn about how they lived and how they sought to work out their faith that impacted the Roman Empire. I was very tempted to not talk about impact investing and this new emerging asset class of impact investing, because I've been so stimulated by Paul's teaching and Pastor Daniel's teaching and Reverend James Shai's teaching, and I thought I just wanted to just do some more Bible teaching. But I'm a man under authority by Dr. Pai, so I have to do as I'm asked, and I will talk about impact investing. But two things before I do that. I just want to share with you some of my own biblical perspective about work, about business. Firstly, we understand from the Genesis mandate that God is himself a worker. He's still a worker. And therefore work is a holy calling. We don't have to justify work and say, I'm doing work, but I'm going to add some religious stuff to it. Work in itself is a holy vocation because God is a worker. And we imitators of God. Work has intrinsic value as well as instrumental value, which we will talk about. And this word, avodah, in the Hebrew is the word for work. It's the same word for worship. It's the same word for service. So when you go to work on Monday, you're going to worship. That's your worship. Our work is our worship. 72 times in the book of Leviticus is this phrase, before the Lord. Before the Lord. Do this before the Lord. Before the Lord. Do everything before the Lord. Go to work before the Lord. Go to your factories before the Lord. Go to your offices before the Lord. Everything in our work is holy unto him. I love this quote by Francis of Assisi: preach Christ always, use words when you have to. In other words, we need to let our lives speak and earn the right to speak. Preach Christ always, use words only if you have to. And then we see that God is our model. And we see that in Genesis, he's very productive. There are billions of stars up there. There are billions of galaxies out there. He's very productive. So we, in his image, need to be productive too. But he's also very creative. You see, God could have made everything the same color. Blue trees, blue milk, everything blue. He could have made everything the same color. Didn't. He's given us this great creativity. Our eyes, I'm a scientist, so I'm interested always in all the technical stuff. Our eyes have 2 million moving parts. Just our eyes. Wonderful, fearfully and wonderfully made. He is creative. And in the stories that I'm going to tell you, we're going to see something of that creativity of God's people. Stewardship. I think we have misunderstood the word, therefore go and subdue the earth. And we've taken that to mean go and exploit the earth. It's not to exploit the earth. It's go and steward the earth. He's put us on earth to be good stewards of the earth. But we also see that God didn't just work all the time. He took a Shabbat. He rested. And so we need also to see from the Genesis story an integration of work and rest. This integration. The problem is, I so enjoy what I do, I'm on holiday all the time, so I don't need to go on holidays anymore. My wife's not very impressed with that. The other thing too is, what we learn from Genesis is that even there, God risked failure. He knew that there was a risk in giving man free choice. And as business people, we understand risk. We're just following what he's doing, right? Can't go wrong. I'm just a follower of Jesus. This is how he worked. He took risk. So we too should be risk takers. Faith is spelled R-I-S-K. Faith is spelled R-I-S-K. And then we learn also from Genesis, God could have put man in darkness on a piece of barren rock somewhere. He didn't. He put man instead in a beautiful garden. A garden that allowed man to grow and develop and flourish. Because man is not just a machine. Man needs environments to allow him to develop to his fullest potential. Slums are not good places for human flourishing. We need to challenge the slums. Anywhere where we see slums, they are not good environment for children to grow up and flourish. God's bothered about that. And so in our businesses, we should be going out to create environments for human flourishing. Our homes should be environments for human flourishing. Our offices should be environments for human flourishing. Our factories should be places for human to develop their fullest potential. Why? Because God is interested in the full development of every single individual. Because they've been made in his image. That's why. Ultimately though, what is the purpose of work? What is the purpose of business? It is this, for me. The ultimate objective is that it creates families. It creates strong families so that we can have strong communities. If our businesses do not result in creating strong communities, we're not fulfilling the purpose, because that was God's work. God's work in Genesis resulted in strong families. That's what he's after, and still after a family. And our businesses, if our businesses break up families through the way we structure our work, our production, that's not what we are learning from Genesis. And then we move on. God has made man in his image, but because he's a worker, he's also created us for work. Therefore, the absence of work dehumanizes us. Again and again, when we go into Africa and people have been unemployed, there have been no jobs for a long time, somehow something of the image of God is lost in these lives. And that when you start to employ them for the first time, you're restoring something of the image of God in their lives. And one of that character is this sense of hope. If you've been unemployed a long time, you lose hope. You lose hope. And so the absence of work itself becomes for us, should become for us as Christians, a mission issue. Because man was created for work. For work. So work and business has intrinsic value as well as instrumental value in that they will create jobs. They will create jobs. One of the biggest challenges we're going to face across many continents will be youth unemployment. We are having many graduates coming through our universities and tertiary education. But there are no jobs. Who are those who can create the jobs? You. If we business people don't create the jobs, there will not be jobs. Man was created for work. And then, unfortunately, because of the fall, we've gone from being a garden to a farm. We've gone from being gardeners, which is always a pleasure. Now we have become laborers. And we have to sweat to create our living. But that's the reality, and that's where we are now. Finally. We think in terms of the gospel as only being one single mandate. The mandate in Galilee. On the mountain of Galilee, Jesus gave what is now called the Great Commission. But there are actually 3 mandates for mission, even in the New Testament, never mind the Old Testament. That's only the first mandate. There is a second mandate, which is Jesus' mandate, the mandate of Nazareth. When he began his ministry, he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, and to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord's favor, the Jubilee year." Very different mandate to the Galilee mandate. And then finally, in Paul's writings, 2 of his epistles, is yet another mandate, an even bigger mandate, which is this, that God's mission really is so big that his mission is to unite all things, whether on earth or in heaven, unto himself. It's a cosmic mandate. Big mandate. And so the Jews have this Talmudic principle called tikkun olam, which is to fix the world that's in this state, the current state of disrepair. And the early church understood that that was also their calling, to fix this world that's broken. Broken relationships, relationships with one another, with creation, with authorities. We are to go and fix this world that is broken, a broken world, and bring good news to this broken world. Moving on now quickly. Many of you will not be familiar with Africa, but I want to show you how big a problem we have in Africa. This is so big that the whole Africa, we can fit China the United States, India, Mexico, Europe, Eastern and Western Europe, and with a bit of spare for Japan as well. That is how big the continent of Africa is. That's how big our problem is in Africa. Most people don't realize what a big problem we have. It's because it's a big continent. But that shouldn't be all the story about Africa. Africa is changing. And the GDP is going to overtake the GDP of Asia. You see, that's why the Chinese government are in Africa. China now owns almost 30% of all the mineral wealth of Africa. But my question is, if the Chinese governments are there, where are the Chinese Christians? Why aren't the Christians following or maybe leading? I see Chinese, mainland Chinese everywhere in Africa, but I don't see the church. I don't see the Chinese business people bringing the gospel with them. And this is my challenge to you. Yes, China is a big country. We have a responsibility as Chinese to serve the nation. And may I say this, one of our greatest calling is actually to love our country. Love your country. Love China. And if you can prove to the government that you really love the country, things will change. They need to be convinced that we love our country. As a scientist, I like data, and here's a bit of data for you. And this explains why I've moved away from doing charity to doing investing. Because I'm part of a network called the Transformational Business Network. This is a network of about 2,000 people, but we are a network of disillusioned philanthropists. Because when you have some money, the easiest thing for us to do is just write a check and give the money to charity. It's much harder for us to give our time. It's much harder for us to go to where the people we are needed. It's much harder to do the incarnational kind of mission. And what we see here in this data is over a 30-year period, as we've given more aid to Africa, the GDP of these countries have actually collapsed. So we have an inverse relationship. The more free money we've given, the more these countries' GDP has dropped. And that's the problem. That's the problem. So I've argued in this book that we have given the equivalent of 6 Marshall Plans in terms of aid and charity to Africa in the last 50 years, and nothing has changed. So the more money we've given away is free, the more somehow, it's just human nature, we just don't help them to become independent. And so this was one of the bit of data that said to me, I can't just keep writing, giving money to charities anymore because nothing changes. And here's another bit of data which is very important for us as business people to understand. On this panel here, if you look at the high-income countries, about 51% on average of our developed economies come from the small, medium-sized enterprises. Only 13% is what we call the informal economy. This is the economy which is cash-based, where there are no accounting, and where the government doesn't know what's happening, and where the government cannot collect any taxes. Look now at what's happened in sub-Saharan Africa. Instead of 51%, the SME sector is only 10%. 10%. Over 55% is the informal sector. So if in your country, half the economy is cash-based, where you can't collect any taxes, it is not a surprise if at the end of the year you need aid. It is not a surprise you need charity. It is not a surprise you need a bailout. You see, in Greece instead of 13% was 30%. That's why they needed a bailout. We can have a separate discussion about what the right level of taxation is. That's a separate discussion. We can also have a very long separate discussion about how wise our governments use our tax money. That's also a very long discussion, but it's a separate discussion. The truth is, if governments do not collect enough taxes from their citizens, they need aid. They will never become independent. And this is the problem. When we do charity, we're carrying on supporting the informal economy. We're not enlarging the tax base. We're not helping these countries, really. Hear me, please. There is a place for doing charity. There is a place for doing good. Carry on doing good. Carry on being generous and doing good. But if you're serious about helping a community transform itself, you're serious about helping countries to build themselves up, we need to do enterprises that will enlarge the tax base for these countries. Only you and I, as business people, can do that. The charity sector can't do that. We are the only people who can do that. That's the calling. That's the calling. Let me move on. So what is this social venture capital? What is this new emerging asset class called impact investing? It is emerging. It is investing for profit, but instead of just looking for a profitable return, a financial return, we're looking also for a social return, and in some instances looking for an environmental return. It's either a double or a triple bottom line kind of investing. It is intentionally designing businesses to tackle poverty, to tackle social problems. It is very intentional. So this is not pure profit making. I can make more money sitting in London or going to the US and investing in the biotech sector. Much more money. But when we go to Africa, it is not to make the money. It is to do something else. I'm going to spend most of my time in Africa, but because we're in Asia, I'm going to start with an Asian story, and I will end up with an Asian story as well. This is my friend Pierre Tami, Swiss missionary, went to Cambodia, started up a group called Hagar. Hagar rescues women and children from the sex industry. We have a huge problem with human trafficking. And the route is from Vietnam, across Cambodia, into Thailand. We, at any one time, will have about 700 women and children in our shelters. Now, the traditional way as a charity would be that we would go out and raise money every year to support these children and women. That's fine. That's one way of doing it. Pierre's view was that that doesn't really restore the dignity for these women. Doesn't help these women become productive citizens of their country. Doesn't help them to become independent. But the problem was, because of their background, nobody would employ them. Once people find out their history, nobody would employ them. So Pierre had to go in and start these businesses. Today, we have 4 businesses that employs about 700 people in our businesses on a profitable basis. Right? These are businesses, but these are intentional businesses that are seeking to address a social problem. Right? But it's about scale. If you do we have a chain of cafes in Vietnam, about 10 of these now, 2 in Phnom Penh, and several up in Laos. If you don't have scale, they're not sustainable. Here we got catering. We run the canteen for the U.S. Embassy in Phnom Penh. We run the canteen for the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. We run the canteen for the Intercontinental Hotel. These are kinds of jobs that these women who've been traumatized and then gone through deep counseling can now work in these kinds of jobs. They have their dignity restored. We're restoring God's image in these lives. Move on. I went to the poorest part in South Africa and wondered what I could do in a region, in an area of 85% unemployment and 30% HIV/AIDS. Again, using a charitable model, I could have gone in to build an orphanage. I could have built a school. And I might have pat myself on the back, turn up for charity dinners, and say what a great job I've done. But I know nothing would change. Nothing would change. I had a very clear calling to put in time and money to create a big enough stone to throw into this pond so that it would be a catalyst to create a ripple and stimulate economic development. Long story. In the end, we bought 40,000 acres of land, restored it, built 70 miles of fencing, elephant-proof fencing, put animals, big animals there for the first time in 150 years. It's never had game in that part of South Africa in 150 years. And built a 5-star lodge on it. Why? Because we wanted to create something that was sustainable. Use local materials where we can, and then got involved with conservation. We're to steward the land. There are a number of endangered species. The black rhino, there are 500 left. Why? Because we here in Asia have this idea that rhino horns have got medicinal powers. and we haven't learned that we're eating toenails. They're the same material as toenails. So tell your mothers that they're eating toenails. We're losing rhinos. Buffaloes. We have traffic jams too. Lions have priority. So when I got there, my intention was to tackle poverty. I've actually ended up learning more about God's creation, how we should be stewarding His creation. Here's the social impact. This is how our people used to live before I bought the land. This is now how they live. So we define standard housing now as brick house, indoor bathroom, flush toilet, electricity on a switch, clean water on a tap, solar panel on the roof. That is our standard housing. And we have a set of metrics that we measure. So, for instance, we measure how many males and females we employ over the years. We measure the average salary excluding managers, because managers tend to skew the numbers. We want to see what's happening with our lowest paid. Are things getting better for them? Then, here is the really important line. The amount of income tax that we pay. Is our tax base increasing? Because if we're not, we're just doing good. There is a place for doing good. I don't want to do good anymore. I want to help these nations develop. We want to help these nations build and grow. So is our tax base increasing through our investments? Then we look at what percentage of our staff have standard housing over time. We measure the number of children who go to tertiary university. Because I come from a family where in one generation we have transformed the economics of our family through education. My parents sacrificed everything to send us to university. If we're not helping our staff to invest in their children's education, nothing will change in their families. We used to ask the question, how many people own mobile phones? We don't ask that anymore because everyone owns mobile phones. Everyone. There are over 600 million mobile phones in Africa. But what we ask is how many people own cars and how many people own houses. And there are two reasons for this. Once we know they're starting to own cars and own houses, we know that their own personal financial disciplines beginning to change. Without asking too many personal questions, we can find out, we know. The second thing is this. It's very difficult living in the informal economy. It's very expensive. Everything costs more in the informal economy. Loan sharks cost more in the informal economy. The poor will always remain poor if they are in the informal economy. We need to help them transition into the formal economy. Once they start owning assets, they start becoming a part of the formal economy. They will have an address. They will start paying taxes on their cars, utility bills. They're becoming a part of the formal economy so they can go to their banks and say, I would like an educational loan, please. The bank manager is going to ask, do you have any assets? Yeah, I got a car. Do you have a credit history? Yeah, I got a credit history. They're part of the formal economy. If we're serious about tackling poverty, we need to help people transition from the informal economy into the formal economy. Let me move on quickly. Maybe just say something about Jakes. Jakes was my first chairman. Professor Jakes Harville rose to the highest office, became Nelson Mandela's chief of staff when he was president. Looked after Mandela's family affairs when he was in jail. But Jakes grew up on a farm next door to us. His parents are buried there. When he retired, I went straight for Jakes. I said, Jakes, you need to come help me because I need a role model. I've learned when we are working in these kinds of environments, we need role models, good role models. And so Jakes was our role model. Let's move on quickly. So that's our strapline, help the poor, come on safari. Not help the poor, send us a donation. Right? This is a business. This is about low-cost education. How do we provide quality education for the poor? Jay Kuhlman had this idea of a low-cost school, and this is a series of low-cost schools that we built in Kenya. Started in 2008 with one school. Today, we're 250 schools, 85,000 children in our schools. We're building 2 schools a week. Every week, we're adding 2 schools. We'll have over 100,000 kids in our schools by the end of the year. It's our scale. Parents pay $4 or $4.50 roughly per month per child. The outside looks horrible because we built to a budget of $30,000 US, but the inside, all the teachers have tablets. Then the head teacher has a smartphone, knows exactly everything that's happening to every child. We can change the syllabus, curriculum, press of a button. Scale. It's only us business people that can do this. We understand scale, how to scale. We're just about to take this to Nigeria, expand into India as well. Thanks to some recent round of financing, together with the likes of PL Media, the founder of eBay, the Media Fund, Gates Fund, the IFC, and ourselves. Here's another business designed to tackle another social problem, toilets. Big problem for us in the slums. A big problem is actually all over Indonesia as well. You know, there are 300 slums in Jakarta alone. And I went into one of them, and it was pretty horrible. Toilets. So, is there a business solution to the problem of toilets? And the answer is yes. So, this is pretty typical of the toilets that we have in the slums around Africa. Today, we franchise these type of toilets called Fresh Life. This woman owns 2 of these cubicles. People pay to use it on a daily basis, so she makes a living. But it's too small. The only way to make this profitable is by taking the human waste away every day and converting it into organic fertilizer. And because the organic market is growing, particularly in Europe, organic fertilizer sells at a premium. You get a better price. But we only have 370 toilets at the moment, and we're only taking out 5 metric tons of waste a day. We need to take out 15 tons a day because we have a big machine that can take 15 tons every day. That's how to make it profitable. So even with toilets, the creativity of people to think about innovative business models to solve these kinds of problems in a business way, not through charity, but in a business sustainable way. Cook stoves. Here's a simple problem. People need to cook. This is what we call 三个石头 the technology. Open fire. That's how we cook still in Africa. It's equivalent of breathing in 40 cigarettes every day. The damage to the health of the women and children. 40 cigarettes a day. Worse still, we're chopping trees down because we're using too much wood. And the problem here is even worse. All the trees around our villages are gone. We got to work further and further away to collect firewood. And who are the people who do it? The children, who should be at schools. That's why when we build schools on a charitable basis, the schools are empty. Schools are empty because the children have to go and collect water and wood every day. Or sometimes they're so hungry, they can't come to school. And you know what? It's usually the girls that go and fetch the wood. The further they walk away from their village, the higher the risk of rape. So a simple problem of cooking every day has so many of these problems. How do you solve this? Well, some Christian brothers have come up with a design of a cook stove which is 50% efficient. So it uses 50% the amount of wood. So that's a saving. Secondly, it takes out about 80% of the smoke and the toxins. Thirdly, because these guys are carbon traders. They trade carbon credits all the time. They said, we can calculate how many trees we're going to save per unit per year. We can also calculate how much carbon we're saving from being polluted. And we're going to sell the carbon credit to one of the big polluters. And in this case, Gazprom, the Russian oil company. And with that money, we're going to take it and subsidize the cost of these stoves to make it cheaper for the poor. And still make a return, a profit for our investors. That's creativity. See, it comes from Genesis. Created in God's image. I love these kinds of stories because I marvel at how creative people are. The Ethiopian government has a tender offer for 9 million of those stoves from next year, so we need to build a factory. I've got 5 minutes left. I really don't know how to do this, but this is a healthcare, low-cost healthcare. Because there's so many new technologies that we can now use. This is my world. We are now trying to find a solution for low-cost healthcare, starting in Uganda. This is, we're building these cars or vehicles primarily for collecting rubbish in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa. This is how they're currently collecting rubbish by hand. We're going to help them own their own cars over 3 to 4 years. This is farming. This is contract outgrowth farming. This is a project that now has 20,000 farmers that we work with who produce paprika for export into Europe. Scale. You need scale. I have no time. This is the largest taxi company in Bangalore. When you go to Bangalore, you'll see spot taxis. 450 taxis. They're helping the men to own their own cars after 4 years. Indonesia, we just made this investment in Indonesia. One of the big social problems there is single mothers in the rural areas because the men leave the villages to go to the cities and then divorce their wives and leave them unsupported. So here's a business selling clothes and fashion stuff by catalog, and we are asking them to grow from 30,000 sales agents to 60,000 sales agents, but they must, the additional 30,000 should be single mothers. I'm a fan. There's no time to talk to you about bonds and impact bonds, but this is the world that we're in now. There are many different vehicles, different funds within the Transformational Business Network. We have probably 9 different funds now, different sizes. Small size about $10 million US. The largest probably about $300 million US. Some of them are very country specific, some are regional specific, some are industry specific, but they're all impact investing, going to the bottom of the pyramid, investing amongst the poor to help the poor build their businesses. And this is a growing universe. My experience coming from Southeast Asia, I don't think charity is ever going to change a country. I don't think aid is ever going to help a country. I think our experience from Southeast Asia and Asia is that enterprise is the way to transform countries. You and I have been gifted by God to be able to go and do that. And the biggest change we need in our minds, in our thinking, is to change from being a donor, recipient, I'm superior, you're inferior, I'm the giver, you're the receiver, to become partners. That's the biggest shift we need to make in our own thinking. Because the donor is always bigger than the recipient, right? We need to learn how to be partners. Let me just finish on this note. This is a picture of Julian the Apostate, and he said this. He said, why do we not observe that it is the Christians' love towards strangers, their care for the graves of the dead, and the pretended holiness of their lives that have done most to increase atheism? In other words, Christianity was regarded as an atheistic religion. Right? Very interesting. For it is disgraceful that when no Jew ever has to beg, and the impious Galileans support not only their own poor, but ours as well, all men see that our people lack aid from us. What this translates to in modern language is this emperor, this Roman emperor, was so angry with these Christians. He says, these wretched Christians, these wretched Galileans, not only are they feeding their own poor, they are feeding ours as well. The early church for hundreds of years cared for the poor, not just their own poor, but for those who did not belong to the church. That was why the church grew. We sang, they will know we are Christians by our love. Well, that was certainly true all the way through for the first few hundred years. Let me read to you one of our greatest church fathers, Tertullian. These gifts that are put into the church's treasury, these are trust funds for piety, trust funds for holiness. They're not to be spent on banquets, drinking parties, dining clubs, and so on, but they're for feeding and burying the poor, for boys and girls destitute of property and parents, for those old people confined to their houses, for victims of shipwreck, and any who are exiled to an island or who are in prison because of the church. These are your responsibilities. So great a work of love burns a brand upon us in regards to some, Tertullian say. See, they say, how they love one another. So we who are united in mind and soul have no hesitation about sharing property. All things are common among us except our wives. That's 200 years on. The church was still doing it. That was why the church grew. That was why it grew. And that's still the reason why it will continue to grow. We must end. I don't have time to read all the other stuff. Pastor James, on that first day, reminded us about perspective. And in the context of eternity, our lives here, we can't even see it as a single line. In the context of eternity, it's nothing. We are nothing. So we shouldn't busy ourselves doing the things that will get burnt up. See our lives in the context of eternity. And I have one encouragement, two warnings. The first encouragement is so that you and I on the last day may stand before our God with the talents that He has given us. And by the way, your business gifts are spiritual gifts. There's no such thing as spiritual and non-spiritual gift. Every gift you have is a spiritual gift. Right? There's no such thing as sacred secular. That's a fallacy that the Westerners have taught us. It's wrong. Everything is sacred. Everything is sacred. So, on that last day, God is going to ask me, Kim, what have you done with the spiritual gift of business that I've given you? And He's going to ask you the same question. He will never condemn us. He says He won't condemn us. But you know what? We might be embarrassed. We might be embarrassed if all we can say is, Lord, I've used your gifts to make money for myself and my family. It's not going to be good enough. I encourage you. How are you going to stand before your Creator who has gifted you? Who has gifted you? And then Jesus gives us two warnings. The first is this: not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, on that last day will be saved, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. And some of you will say, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Lord, did we not preach in your name? Lord, did we not go and do mission trips in your name? Lord, did we not sing in your name? Not everyone who calls me Lord, Lord, will be saved, but he who does the will of the Father. And the final warning that frightens me, that warning frightens me. That grounds me. That grounds me. The other warning that Jesus gives that grounds me is this, in Matthew chapter 25. Separate now the goats from the sheep. And there he says, the king says, come, blessed ones, receive the kingdom. Receive the kingdom. For I was naked, and you clothed me. For I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. For I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. But you would say, Lord, when did we see you naked? When did we see you thirsty? For what? As much as you have done to the least of these, you have done it unto me. And that's a warning. That's a warning. And so, we finish with this. People ask me, what kind of a Christian are you? Expecting me to say I'm a born-again Christian. I say, no. I'm a failed-again Christian. I'm a failed-again Christian. This is the Japanese art of kintsugi. Beautiful art. And these are broken pieces, broken vessels, glued together with gold. With gold. Broken vessels glued together by gold and made even more beautiful as a result. So much so that now people deliberately break them and then glue them together with gold. I'm a failed again Christian because I'm just like that vessel. Broken, but glued together with gold, so that God could put his earthen treasure in, so that it may overflow to others. Brothers and sisters, you are so gifted. You are so gifted. My prayer for you, for me, is that we will stand before our Creator on that last day and not be ashamed and not be embarrassed, so that we may hear him say to us, well done, good and faithful servants. Amen.